Hello my dear sewing friends, it's Alisa here and welcome to Sew and Grow, a channel that is dedicated to creating beautiful and creative clothes for our kids. And today we have a really fun, quick and easy episode because I would love to share with you how I trace and create a pattern of undies and then of course sew them up. Now many will argue that buying underwear is much cheaper and much faster, and they're not wrong, but making your own undies can actually do two really great things for you. Number one, it practices your sewing skills, especially if you're new to sewing with knits. This is a great little project to really get that hang of working with knits, and in the process you're making actually something useful because who doesn't need underwear? And number two, if you ever dealt with an excess amount of fabric scraps, this is a great little project how to tame that pile of fabric scraps and again, in the process, create something actually useful. And as I mentioned, we're going to be copying a pattern. So first, grab a pair of underwear that you would like to copy, and then of course your tracing paper, your printer paper, your pattern paper, whatever you have available, grab that and let's get started. I'm going to take my undies, place them on the tracing paper, and I'm going to outline the back pattern piece first. Now these are the ones that I made myself, and here I used underwear elastic that slightly extends past the finished edge of the garment. But my goal right now is to outline the true edge. So I'm gonna go in and I'm actually going to correct my pattern ever so slightly to reflect that. Same would be true for underwear with elastic like this. If your undies have a gusset, mark the placement of it on your pattern as well. Now I like to cut the square around my traced pattern, fold it in half, and then make sure that both sides are symmetrical, and then cut it out. Next, I'm going to trace the front pattern piece, but this time I'm going to place my pattern paper on top. Here I'm going to fill the outline of the pattern piece with my fingers and then use my pencil in order to trace it. Don't forget to mark the placement of the gusset on the front pattern piece as well. From here, I do all of the same steps that I do for the back pattern piece. The only difference is that I don't cut it out just yet, and I don't outline it in marker as well. Now in this case, I did outline it in green marker so that way you can see it a little bit better, but usually I just leave it in pencil at this very moment. Next, I'm going to grab my back pattern piece, and I need to make sure that certain elements align. First, we want to place them like this, front on top, back on the bottom, and we want to make sure that this creates a really nice smooth line on both sides, and as you can see it doesn't, so we need to adjust it. Now we want to make sure that the side seams also match in length, and they also create a really nice and smooth transition in this particular place. I'm going to make sure that the curve of the side seam is the same on front and the back pattern piece, and since my side seam is curved, I'm going to align the curve right here on the bottom and then check this transition. Usually the back pattern piece is also a little bit higher than the front pattern piece, and here you can see that as well. Now that I have adjusted everything that I need to, I can finalize my front pattern piece. As always, I want to make sure that both sides are symmetrical and even. And after that, I usually go ahead and cut it out. As a final step, I took my front pattern piece and my back pattern piece and placed them together at the gusset, and then I taped them. Then I also traced the gusset on a separate piece of pattern paper. After that, I marked my pattern pieces so that way I know that there's no seam allowances, the direction of the stretch, and then on my gusset, I clearly identified where's the front and where's the back. Now when prepping my fabric, first of all, it is already washed, and then I identified the greatest direction of the stretch and placed my pattern accordingly. Since my pattern is without any seam allowances, I'm going to be cutting it out, adding 1/4 of an inch on all sides. After the pattern is cut, I also make sure to mark the positioning of the gusset on the front pattern piece with 2 little notches, one on each side. Speaking of the gusset, we will need to cut one of those as well. Now when it comes to undies, there are so many things that you can use and so many different sewing tools and sewing notions, but in this particular video I would love to show you 2 methods, and from there you can pick and choose which one you like better. First step, no matter what technique I'm going to be using, is to attach a gusset to the main pattern piece. For that, I'm going to place it wrong side up, and I'm going to take my gusset, place it wrong side up as well. Here are the 2 little notches that I have made on my pattern. I'm going to place the gusset 1/4 inch lower than those marks, pin and then sew straight across from one mark to another mark using a lightning stitch. For this, you can also use just a simple zigzag stitch as well. And here I'm sewing with white thread so that way you can see it a little bit better. Once done, this is what you're going to have. And here I like to give it a really good press this way, then fold my gusset down and then give it another really good press. For this first technique, I'm going to be using underwear elastic, and for those who are wondering where to get some for a good price, I will leave a link for you in the description of this video. Now I'm going to be attaching this elastic in 2 steps. First step is going to be placing elastic like so, and then attaching it with a zigzag stitch, stretching it just the slightest amount. Now, important part to note is that I'm starting to attach this elastic 1 inch away, and then I'm also going to finish it 1 inch before the end of the seam. Once that is done, I'm going to continue by sewing a side seam, and for this one I'm going to use a lightning stitch. And one of the reasons why I like using lightning stitch on knit fabrics is because that is the only stitch that can actually press open the seam allowances and create less bulk. Once the side seam is sewn, now I'm going to grab the loose ends of the elastic, overlap them, and then attach them using the same technique as before. Of course, don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and at the end of every seam that you're doing. Now that the elastic is attached in the round, we can go ahead, fold it under, and here you have that beautiful little edge of the elastic, and we can secure it by using a 3-step zigzag stitch and sewing right on top. Now you can also use just a regular zigzag, but I do find that a 3-step zigzag puckers knit fabrics less and also stretches them and distorts them less in the process, therefore it makes a better result in the end. After being done with one side, I'm going to repeat all of the same steps for the other side. And after that, we're on to finishing the elastic on the top. And here I'm going to use exactly the same 2-step sequence. The only difference is that I'm going to cut my elastic about 1 inch shorter so that way I can stretch it a little bit as I sew it in. But don't forget that you need a little bit extra to overlap it at the side seam. And here is the final result. Now keep in mind there are so many ways how you can sew undies, and this is just one of many. Now let me turn this wrong side out so that way you can see some of the details, like for example, pressed open seams, the overlap of the elastic, and also the gusset. For the second technique, the first few steps are absolutely the same. But instead of finishing the leg opening with the underwear elastic, I simply turn the hem allowance 1/4 inch under and then stitched it down with a 3-step zigzag. In return, it creates a beautiful little scalloped hem. The trick in order to create a little scalloped hem like this is to make sure that every top of a 3-step zigzag triangle actually falls off of the fabric and doesn't pierce it at all. That will in turn create the little scallops. Now I've done a full separate video on interesting zigzag stitch techniques, and this one is described there in detail. Therefore, I will leave a link for that video in the description so that way if you want you can take a look. If after completing your hem your fabric is slightly wavy, don't worry. Usually giving it a good press before moving on to the next step will do the job. After that, the next step is to complete the side seam. Now here, since I didn't use any underwear elastic, it doesn't really matter which stretch stitch I'm going to be using. To complete the top of the undies, I'm going to be following exactly the same steps as in the previous technique. And that's it. Let's take a look at the final result. Well, there you have it, you made your own undies. Now, if you'd like to know how to make this pattern bigger, so that way as your child grows, you can keep making this pattern over and over again without actually tracing new pair of underwear, then click on the video right over here. I'll guide you through the way that I do it, so that way you can do it as well. Until next time, happy, thoughtful sewing. I'll see you very soon. Bye!